You think you can handle this? Come on, who's first?
At 9:47 on a Saturday night, an undefeated MMA champion stood inside a Hells Angels clubhouse and laughed at every man surrounding him. He had already knocked one biker unconscious during what was supposed to be a friendly charity exhibition. Then he removed his gloves and made one final mistake. Choose your best fighter. Nobody pointed toward the chapter's towering sergeant. Nobody chose the former heavyweight near the door. Instead, every biker turned toward a skinny woman sitting alone in the darkest corner. She weighed barely 120 pounds. The champion laughed until she placed the glove she was repairing on the table and quietly stood up, because everyone in that room knew something he didn't. Before we go back to where this story began, tell me where you're watching from today. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel and how many people around the world believe that real strength is shown through courage, restraint, and kindness. At 9:47 on a Saturday night, the Iron Ridge Clubhouse was packed shoulder to shoulder. Sponsor banners hung above the bar. Cameras surrounded a temporary exhibition area, while thousands more watched through a live stream. At its center stood Kellan Voss, an undefeated mixed martial arts champion with blood on one glove and a smile that did not belong at a charity event. A few feet away, two men carried an unconscious biker from the floor. The exhibition had been advertised as friendly. Controlled contact. No full-force strikes. No attacks after the referee intervened. Kellan had ignored every rule. He removed his gloves, dropped them beside the fallen man, and faced the leather-clad members surrounding him. Choose your best fighter. No one answered. The enormous chapter sergeant remained beside the bar. The former heavyweight near the entrance did not move. Then every biker turned toward the darkest corner. A thin woman sat beneath a faded photograph, repairing the torn strap of an old glove. Brynn Mercer was 43, barely 120 pounds, with narrow shoulders and an exhausted face. Kellan stared at her and laughed. He thought they were mocking him. They were not. Brynn placed the glove on the table. You asked them to choose. Nobody said I would accept. To understand why the biggest men in the room trusted the smallest person there, we have to go back 2 weeks. Iron Ridge had been standing on the same patch of land for nearly 40 years. From the road, it looked like an aging biker clubhouse surrounded by motorcycles, scrap metal, and weathered fencing. But behind the main building was a workshop that most outsiders never saw. Inside, injured veterans learned to work with their hands again. Men and women recovering from addiction were given temporary jobs while they rebuilt their lives. Young adults who had aged out of unstable homes could enter an apprenticeship, learn motorcycle repair, and leave with skills strong enough to earn a living. Among the apprentices was 18-year-old Micah Trent. His father had died from an overdose when Micah was 15, and for 2 years afterward, the boy followed the same path with frightening speed. He stopped attending school. He slept in abandoned buildings. He was arrested twice for stealing tools he later admitted he did not even know how to use. Iron Ridge took him in when almost everyone else had stopped answering his calls. 9 months later, Micah was sober. He still spoke quietly and flinched when someone raised a voice, but he had become one of the workshop's most dependable apprentices. He could dismantle a damaged engine and put almost everything back where it belonged. When he made a mistake, he no longer disappeared. He asked for help. Iron Ridge was the place that kept him alive. Brynn worked there several days each week as a physical rehabilitation specialist. She helped one veteran regain movement in a shoulder damaged overseas. She taught an older member how to protect an injured knee while lifting heavy parts. She adjusted workstations for men whose bodies could no longer do what pride kept telling them they should. Most apprentices assumed she was simply a therapist who knew motorcycles. The older members knew better. One afternoon, Chapter President Harlan Gravel Sloan called Brynn into the office at the back of the workshop. Harlan was broad, gray-bearded, and usually difficult to unsettle. That day, he had a stack of legal papers spread across the desk. A development company called Kroll Urban Freight had purchased an old debt allegedly tied to the Iron Ridge property. According to the documents, the chapter had defaulted on payments connected to renovations completed years earlier. If the debt was upheld, the company could begin foreclosure proceedings. Harlan pointed to 3 signatures. 2 belonged to former trustees who had died before the agreement was supposedly amended. The third belonged to a county officer who had never worked in the position listed beside his name. The documents were fraudulent. Harlan was certain of it. But certainty was not evidence, and the company behind them had enough money to keep the chapter trapped in court until the workshop collapsed under legal fees. Losing the property would not simply mean a group of bikers had to find another place to meet. It would mean the veteran relearning how to grip a wrench would lose his therapy. It would mean recovering addicts would lose the jobs keeping them stable. It would mean Micah and others like him would lose the first place that had trusted them before they learned to trust themselves. If you believe a place helping veterans and struggling young people deserves protection, subscribe and stand with the people trying to save it. The man trying to take that place was Barrett Kroll. From his office, Kroll could see the land his company had already purchased. His planned freight terminal promised enormous profits, but the project had one expensive flaw. The only access road wide enough for the largest transport vehicles ran directly through Iron Ridge land. A legitimate property dispute could take years. Kroll did not intend to wait. The chapter operated its workshop under a community use license. A serious public safety incident could place that license under immediate review. If members were filmed assaulting someone during a public event, the county could close the workshop while the investigation proceeded. Sponsors would withdraw. Families would stop sending apprentices. Legal costs would rise, and Kroll could accelerate the foreclosure while the chapter's reputation collapsed. He did not need to defeat the Hells Angels in court. He needed them to behave exactly as frightened people expected them to behave. On the corner of Kroll's desk sat an old photograph. It showed a much younger Brynn standing beside her older brother, Elias Mercer. Elias wore training gloves and smiled toward the camera. Brynn stood beside him with one arm folded, already watching the room instead of the lens. Kroll studied the photograph for several seconds. Then his office door opened, and he turned it face down. Kellan Voss entered wearing an expensive jacket over a fighter's frame. He was undefeated in professional competition and recognized across the country, but his career had begun to narrow around the same problem. Outside the cage, he had been involved in multiple confrontations. One ended with a nightclub employee hospitalized. Another showed Kellan threatening a fan who had mocked him. Sponsors were becoming cautious. Commentators had begun asking whether his temper would eventually cost him more than a fine. Kroll offered him a way to repair the damage. The proposal was a documentary series built around one claim. Trained professional fighters were tougher, more disciplined, and more dangerous than men who built reputations through street violence and leather patches. Kellan would visit biker clubs, veterans' gyms, and underground fight spaces. He would expose false toughness, defeat selected challengers, and present himself as the controlled professional surrounded by reckless amateurs. The final episode would be filmed at Iron Ridge's annual Veterans Fundraiser. Kellan saw television deals, sponsorships, and a future beyond championship belts. He believed humiliating the chapter would make him famous to millions of people who had never watched a cage fight. Kroll saw something else. He saw a champion who could endure broken bones, but could not endure being laughed at. Kellan thought he had been hired to make the bikers look weak. Kroll had hired him because he believed the champion's temper could destroy them. Brynn's connection to Iron Ridge had begun long before she worked in rehabilitation. Her father helped establish the workshop when it was little more than a concrete floor beneath a leaking roof. Her older brother Elias grew into one of the chapter's most respected fighters, not because he was cruel, but because he remained calm when other men lost control. Brynn followed him everywhere. She was smaller than nearly everyone she trained with, so strength could never be her answer. She learned judo to redirect force, wrestling to control balance, and submission grappling to restrict movement without relying on strikes. She studied defensive control and became fascinated by the moment a skilled opponent stopped making intelligent decisions. Anger always announced itself. A shoulder tightened. A jaw shifted. Weight moved forward too early. Breathing became louder. Eyes stopped watching the whole body and fixed on the place a man wanted to hurt. Brynn learned to recognize that change before the opponent recognized it himself. By her early 20s, experienced fighters respected her timing. She could not overpower them, but she could persuade them to overpower themselves. Then Elias accepted an invitation to an illegal exhibition organized by a young Barrett Kroll. Kroll was not yet a property developer. He promoted unlicensed fights in warehouses and private clubs, promising cash to men willing to perform for wealthy spectators. Elias told Brynn it would be one match. The purse could replace damaged equipment at the workshop and cover several months of bills. Shortly before the fight, someone gave Elias what was described as a legal performance supplement. Brynn noticed the shaking first. His hands trembled while she wrapped them. His pupils were enlarged despite the bright lights. His breathing became shallow and uneven before he had thrown a single strike. When she placed 2 fingers against his neck, his heartbeat was so violent she could see it pulsing beneath the skin. She told him not to enter the ring. Elias smiled and said nerves had finally caught him. Brynn went to an official. The man told her the fighters had already been paid. Another insisted Elias had passed a medical check. Across the room, Kroll spoke to a group of guests as if nothing unusual was happening. The match continued. Elias began well, then lost coordination. Between rounds, Brynn begged the adults around him to stop it. They gave him water, pressed ice against his neck, and sent him back out because the crowd had paid to watch. He collapsed before the final bell. The official report blamed an undiagnosed heart condition. The supplement disappeared. Medical records were incomplete. Witnesses changed their accounts. Kroll denied giving Elias anything and claimed he barely knew the fighter. Brynn accused him publicly, but accusation without proof only made her appear consumed by grief. After the funeral, she stopped competing. She kept training privately and later built a career helping injured people recover, but she never entered another public match. For 20 years, she preserved one of Elias's old gloves in a locked drawer. Its wrist strap had torn on the night he died. She could have repaired it at any time. She never did. Part of her believed she had failed him. She had seen the danger, understood it, and still allowed louder voices to send him into the ring. When Brynn saw Barrett Kroll entering Iron Ridge beside Kellan Voss, she understood that the past had not returned by accident. Kellan arrived with camera operators, producers, assistants, and enough equipment to make the working garage feel like a film set. At first, he smiled for photographs and shook hands with local supporters. Once the controlled interviews began, his tone changed. He asked aging members whether leather vests made them feel younger. He questioned veterans about whether they had joined the chapter because civilian life had made them irrelevant. He stood beside recovering addicts and asked whether Iron Ridge was teaching them motorcycle repair or preparing them to commit crimes more efficiently. Whenever someone gave a thoughtful answer, the crew stopped recording. Whenever irritation appeared, every camera moved closer. Micah was carrying a rebuilt carburetor when Kellan noticed the Iron Ridge Workshop name across his shirt. Kellan asked whether the boy could fight. Micah said he was there to learn engines. Kellan stepped into his path and suggested a light sparring session for the documentary. Micah refused again. The champion smiled toward the nearest camera. So they teach you to wear the shirt, but not how to defend it. Micah tried to move around him. Kellan called him a coward and shoved him backward into a steel tool cabinet. The impact scattered sockets across the floor. Before Micah could regain his balance, Brynn stepped between them. She told Kellan to leave the boy alone. Kellan looked down at her narrow frame, amused by the interruption. He placed one hand on her shoulder and attempted to push her aside. Brynn moved before the pressure reached her feet. She turned slightly, caught his wrist, lowered her center of gravity, and redirected his arm across his own body. Kellan's weight carried him forward. Brynn trapped the joint and pinned him against the cabinet without throwing a punch. His shoes scraped across the concrete. Metal struck metal. For 2 seconds, the undefeated champion could not move without increasing the pressure on his wrist. Then Brynn released him and stepped back. The workshop had gone silent. No one laughed. That made it worse. Kellan looked toward the camera and realized the entire exchange had been recorded. Brynn's face showed no triumph. You were told to leave him alone. Kroll appeared from behind the crew and ordered the camera operator to delete the footage. The technician opened the documentary's temporary server, entered a password, and moved the clip into a protected folder before pretending to erase it. Across the room, Micah watched every key he pressed. Kellan insisted Brynn had surprised him. He repeated it to the crew, to Kroll, and later to himself in the hotel mirror. He had not been prepared. He had not resisted. It had not been a real contest. But each explanation made the moment feel larger. Kroll told him the chapter members had waited until he left before laughing. He claimed they were already describing how a skinny woman had controlled the undefeated champion with one hand. There was no evidence that anyone had said it. Kellan believed it anyway. At Iron Ridge, Harlan gathered every member and gave 4 instructions. Do not respond to insults. Do not threaten the film crew. Do not touch Kellan. Assume every confrontation is being recorded, even when no camera is visible. Kroll's crew responded by increasing the pressure. They released edited clips showing bikers walking away from Kellan's challenges. They removed every explanation and presented restraint as fear. Online commentators mocked Iron Ridge. Headlines asked whether the famous chapter had finally met someone it could not intimidate. Kellan began referring to Brynn during interviews, though he refused to use her name. The little woman hiding behind 60 men, he called her. He challenged her to prove the cabinet incident had not been an accident. Brynn gave no interviews and posted no response. She continued working with injured members, helping Micah rebuild engines and repairing equipment in the same quiet manner as before. Kellan interpreted her silence as fear. He could tolerate pain, exhaustion, and the possibility of losing a fight. What he could not tolerate was the belief that strangers were laughing at him. Brynn could tolerate being mocked if responding placed someone else at risk. That difference was exactly what Kroll intended to exploit. As the annual Veterans fundraiser approached, camera crews expanded their setup inside the clubhouse. Invitations multiplied. Sponsors promoted the event. Kellan trained for what had been described publicly as a friendly exhibition, while Kroll prepared for something far more destructive. On the night before the fundraiser, Kroll stood beside Kellan in the empty exhibition area and looked toward the dark corner where Brynn usually sat. By Saturday night, he said, she'll either fight you or watch everything she cares about disappear. By noon, Micah spent the afternoon explaining how apprentices restored damaged engines. He spoke more confidently than he had 2 weeks earlier. When he forgot a term, the older mechanics let him find it. Brynn watched as he showed a young veteran how to adjust a carburetor without forcing the screws. She kept Elias's old glove beside her on the table. The torn wrist strap had been cleaned, aligned, and partly restitched. She had worked on it slowly during the week, stopping whenever memory made her hands tighten. The repair was almost complete, but one section remained open. Around them, cameras had multiplied. Kroll's crew had installed cameras above the bar, near the exits, beside the workshop doors, and around the exhibition area. Some were obvious, others disappeared into lighting rigs. The stated purpose was to document Kellan's friendly appearance. Harlan knew they were waiting to record a reaction. He repeated the warning to his members throughout the afternoon. No threats. No retaliation. No matter what happened, nobody touched Kellan Voss. Kellan arrived wearing sponsor clothing and a practice smile. He signed gloves for children, posed beside veterans, and praised the workshop whenever cameras were close. Kroll followed, speaking to county representatives and investors as though he already owned the property. The exhibition paired Kellan with Rafe Donnelly, a large chapter volunteer who had boxed when younger. Rafe remained powerful, but at 56 he had not competed seriously in years. He participated because the event was supposed to be controlled. The referee reviewed the conditions in front of both men. Light contact. No elbows. No attacks after a break. Most importantly, no full-force strikes to the head. Kellan nodded. Rafe nodded. The opening exchange was careful. Kellan let Rafe touch his guard and work short combinations, exaggerating his reactions for the crowd. Rafe understood the performance and played along. The audience relaxed. For nearly 2 minutes, Kellan followed every rule. Then the referee separated them after a clinch. Rafe stepped backward with both hands lowered. Outside the exhibition area, Kroll lifted 2 fingers. Kellan's expression changed. He crossed the space before the referee had finished speaking and drove a full-force right hand into the side of Rafe's head. The sound silenced the nearest part of the room. Rafe's legs folded beneath him. His shoulder struck the floor first, followed by his head. The referee dropped beside him and called for medical assistance. Kellan did not kneel. He did not apologize. He looked toward the cameras, removed his gloves, and threw them down beside the unconscious man. Then he opened his arms to the chapter. Choose your best fighter. The sentence traveled through the clubhouse more sharply than the punch had. Nobody moved. Harlan stood near Rafe while trained volunteers checked his breathing. The chapter sergeant remained beside the bar. The former heavyweight near the entrance tightened his jaw, but kept his hands open. Then, one by one, the bikers turned toward the corner. Brynn looked up from the glove in her hands. Kellan followed their eyes and saw the thin woman he had been trying to provoke for 2 weeks. Amusement returned to his face. He glanced from Brynn to the largest men in the room, waiting for someone to admit it was a joke. Nobody did. Brynn set the glove on the table. "You asked them to choose," she said. "Nobody said I would accept." Kellan smiled. Her refusal was not a disappointment. It was confirmation. Kroll stepped into the center of the room before the medical team had finished lifting Rafe onto a stretcher. He faced the nearest camera with the measured concern of a man who had rehearsed compassion. He claimed the strike had been an unfortunate accident caused by confusion during the referee's instructions. Then he shifted attention toward Iron Ridge. For years, he said, the chapter had cultivated a reputation based on intimidation. Its members allowed the public to believe they were dangerous, yet when confronted by a legitimate professional athlete under supervised conditions, they hid behind silence. He pointed toward the workshop, an organization that trained vulnerable teenagers while surrounding them with violent men deserved public scrutiny. His company would submit an immediate petition to the county requesting suspension of Iron Ridge's community use license on safety grounds. The fundraiser crowd began shouting objections, but Kroll spoke over them. He said Iron Ridge could not be trusted with apprentices, recovering addicts, or injured veterans. Until an independent review was completed, the workshop should close. Kellan stepped away from the exhibition area and walked toward Micah. The boy had been standing near the stretcher, pale with anger, watching Rafe being carried out. Kellan looked at the workshop name across Micah's shirt. "This is what they teach you?" He asked. "How to stand around while old men pretend they're dangerous." Micah's voice shook, but he answered, "They taught me how to stay alive." Kellan looked toward the camera. "They take kids with nowhere else to go, put them in colors, and call it saving them." Micah told him he knew nothing about the workshop. Kellan moved closer. Micah did not step back. The slap came quickly. Kellan's open hand struck the side of the boy's face and turned his head. It was not a competitive strike. It was worse in a different way. It was a grown champion using his size against an 18-year-old who had already refused to fight him. Comment, protect the kid. If you believe a grown champion putting his hands on an 18-year-old crosses every line. Several bikers moved before catching themselves. Harlan raised one hand, stopping them. Every camera in the clubhouse turned toward the chapter, waiting for violence. The tiredness left her eyes. The grief was still there, but something colder settled. Independent medical team. Written terms witnessed by county representatives. Then she stated the other half. If I win, or if I remain standing through all 3 rounds, Kroll cancels the debt, withdraws every complaint, and transfers the property into a permanent community trust. The laughter left Kellan's face. Kroll studied her. Brynn was not claiming she could knock out the champion. She was not even requiring herself to defeat him. She only had to survive 3 rounds. That condition made the challenge sound reasonable enough to attract public support, but desperate enough to tempt a man who believed there was no possibility she could achieve it. Kroll asked for 7 days. Brynn agreed. Kellan stepped into the exhibition area until they were separated by only a few feet. He stood nearly a head taller and weighed almost 80 pounds more. "You won't make it through 1, he said. Brynn looked at Micah's reddening cheek. "Then you have nothing to worry about." Kroll accepted before Harlan could object again. By midnight, lawyers had reduced the agreement to writing, and county representatives witnessed the signatures. The match would be supervised, medically staffed, and streamed publicly. Iron Ridge's future now depended on Brynn surviving 3 rounds. The promotion began the following morning. Kroll's team released a poster carrying the words, "The world champion versus the 120-pound biker woman." Kellan appeared in professionally filmed training sessions designed to remove any doubt about the difference between them. He drove powerful combinations into heavy bags until their chains shook. He lifted training partners during sports programs debated whether any regulator should have approved it. Some accused Iron Ridge of using a middle-aged woman to create sympathy. Others suggested Brynn was an actress and the entire challenge had been staged. The cabinet footage remained hidden, so the public had no evidence she possessed any meaningful skill. Kellan gave interview after interview. He claimed Brynn had caught his wrist during a relaxed moment, and that the chapter had built a myth around 2 seconds of surprise. He promised to keep one hand behind his back during the first round. If she managed to touch him, he said, he might start taking the match seriously. Brynn gave no interviews. Reporters waited outside Iron Ridge, but Brynn entered through the workshop and left after dark without speaking. Online comments mocked her age, weight, posture, and silence. Some predicted she would surrender before the bell. Others called the event an execution disguised as entertainment. Kroll encouraged all of it. The more people laughed, the more pressure Brynn would feel to prove something. The more Kellan promised humiliation, the harder it would become for him to accept a patient victory. During one promotional broadcast, a sports physician reviewed footage from Kellan's public training. The doctor paused after a hard wrestling round and pointed toward Kellan's hands. He began explaining that the champion's recovery appeared unusual. His breathing had slowed, but a tremor remained in his fingers. The doctor asked whether Kellan had recently changed supplements or medications. Before he could complete the thought, the documentary host moved to another subject. The public believed Brynn's silence meant she had no answer. In reality, she had spent every night studying the one opponent Kellan had never learned to control, himself. After the workshop closed, Harlan and two experienced members helped her prepare. The first controlled session ended badly. One partner threw a moderate body shot through a padded shield. Brynn absorbed it incorrectly, dropped to one knee, and needed several seconds before she could inhale fully. When she stood, an old injury in her left knee tightened. She tried to continue, but her movement had slowed. Harlan stopped the session. Brynn argued. He asked how she expected to survive Kellan if a controlled strike had dropped her. She answered by asking him to throw it again. The second attempt hurt less because she shifted before impact, but the force still pushed her backward. Against Kellan, the same strike would arrive faster and with enough power to end the match. Between rounds, she struggled to recover. Her age and size were not disguises. She had not maintained championship conditioning for 20 years. If Kellan landed cleanly, she could be seriously injured. Harlan told her the chapter would find another way to fight the debt. Brynn reminded him that the legal deadline had not stopped. Kroll's petition was already moving through the county. Even if the match were canceled, the workshop could be suspended within days. Once the apprentices were scattered and the sponsors withdrew, reopening might become impossible. She was not preparing because she believed she was stronger. She was preparing because Kroll had designed a situation in which physical danger was the only path still open. Brynn studied every recording she could find of Kellan's professional fights. She watched victories, interviews, weigh-ins, training sessions, and the few moments when opponents had frustrated him. 3 patterns emerged. The first was emotional. Kellan remained disciplined while he believed he controlled the story of a fight. When an opponent embarrassed him, even briefly, he abandoned the plan created by his coaches. He chased immediate revenge. The second was physical. His explosiveness allowed him to escape bad grappling positions, but every escape required enormous energy. Opponents who forced him to repeat those efforts could slow him, although few survived long enough to benefit from it. The third was almost. She needed to recognize the moment before it began. Her strategy depended on patience. She would refuse to chase him, even if the crowd mocked her. When he closed distance, she would enter clinches and make him carry her weight against the cage. She would force resets, deny him the clean exchanges he needed, and wait for one opportunity to embarrass him publicly. Not injure him, embarrass him. If he remained calm, his speed and skill would overwhelm her. If he became angry, he would begin fighting his own pride. One night, Harlan found her sitting alone beside the training area with ice wrapped around her knee. He asked whether she was afraid. Brynn did not pretend otherwise. "Every time I close my eyes, I feel that body shot," she said. "Then I imagine what his will feel like." Harlan told her fear was a reason to stop. "No," she answered. "Courage isn't believing he can't hurt me. It's knowing he can and walking in any way." Harlan sat beside her. She turned Kellan's fight footage back to the beginning. "If he stays disciplined, I lose." While Brynn studied the champion, Micah studied the documentary crew. He remembered the technician's fingers moving across the keyboard after the cabinet incident. The password had contained 6 letters followed by 2 numbers. Micah had repeated them silently until he could write them down. 3 nights before the fight, Kroll's crew left its temporary server connected in a secured production room beside the workshop. Micah waited until the last technician crossed into the clubhouse, then entered through a service door used for electrical repairs. The password worked. Micah opened the most recent clip and saw Dr. Lennox Fain standing with Kellan before the fundraiser exhibition. Kellan was seated with his shirt lifted while Fain prepared a syringe. Kroll's voice could be heard asking whether the dose would increase aggression. Fane answered that it would improve intensity and recovery, but warned that the champion's heart rate should be monitored. Kroll told him the exhibition would last only a few minutes. Micah opened another file. Then Micah saw Elias Mercer's name. His hand stopped over the keyboard. The file was older than the others and partly corrupted. He attempted to open it while copying the full folder onto a portable drive. A warning appeared. Remote administrator connected. Someone had detected him. Micah pulled the drive free before the transfer completed. The screen locked. Footsteps entered the hallway outside. He did not know how to fight, and he did not try. He switched off the breaker and moved through darkness toward a maintenance passage behind the parts shelves. He had helped reroute wiring there months earlier. Kroll's security men entered while Micah crawled beneath a bench toward a second panel. One guard saw movement and followed. Micah knocked loose bearings behind him. The guard stepped on them, lost balance, and struck a work table. Micah crossed the wash area and storage room, then escaped through a delivery hatch too narrow for the larger man. He reached the main workshop with the drive still in his hand. Most of the files had failed to copy. The Elias document would not open fully. Only 4 fragments remained readable. Mercer. Dosage. Adverse response. Continue event. It was not enough to prove exactly what had happened, but it was more than Brynn had possessed for 20 years. Micah showed her the injection video. Brynn watched Fane prepare the syringe. At first, she focused on Kellan. Then the doctor turned toward the camera. The years changed his hair and face, but not the way he held the syringe between 2 fingers. Brynn recognized him. Lennox Fane had been in the room before Elias's final fight. The remaining days passed beneath increasing pressure. Kroll denied that anyone connected to his production had used banned substances. His lawyers threatened action if Iron Ridge released stolen material. Harlan quietly sent copies of Micah's partial files to an attorney and a state investigator, but neither could promise immediate intervention. The match would proceed. On fight night, the motorcycle workshop no longer resembled a place where apprentices repaired engines. A temporary cage occupied the center of the floor. Rows of spectators extended beyond the work bays. Additional crowds watched from screens outside, while hundreds of thousands joined the live stream. Kellan arrived through the main entrance beneath moving lights and sponsor banners. Security surrounded him. Cameras followed every step. Dr. Fane remained close to his corner, carrying a black medical case. Kroll walked behind them with the confidence of a man arriving to collect property he already considered his. Brynn prepared in the rehabilitation room. She wore a plain dark shirt and black training shorts. There was no elaborate entrance clothing, no slogan, and no attempt to make her appear larger than she was. Harlan wrapped her hands. Neither of them spoke about Elias. Before leaving the room, Brynn picked up the repaired glove. The torn strap was complete now. She carried it into the workshop and found Micah near the production equipment. She placed the glove in his hands. Whatever happens, finish what you started. Micah looked toward the cage. What if you need me? I need you to do that. Kellan's entrance music ended. The crowd remained loud as he entered the cage and lifted both arms. Brynn walked toward it alone. The bikers did not follow. They stood in a silent line behind her, giving her no spectacle to hide inside. As she stepped through the cage door, the size difference became impossible to dismiss. Kellan's shoulders were wider. His arms were heavier. Even at rest, his movement carried the balance of someone who had trained daily against elite opponents. Brynn looked smaller than she had in the workshop. The referee called them to the center. The room quieted enough for Kellan's voice to carry. You can still walk away. Brynn met his eyes. That was your last chance, not mine. The referee reviewed the rules, checked both fighters, and stepped away. The opening bell sounded. Kellan kept his promise for less than a minute. He placed his right hand behind his back and moved around Brynn with his left extended, inviting her to attack. He smiled toward the crowd and offered his chin as though she were a child being allowed one free attempt. Brynn did not move toward him. She stayed outside his range and adjusted her position each time he circled. Kellan waved her forward. She refused. The first laughter came from somewhere near the rear of the workshop. It spread when Kellan continued posing while Brynn denied him the performance. The laughter was not directed at her. Kellan lowered the hand from behind his back. He stepped forward sharply and tested her guard with a fast jab. Brynn moved away. A second punch passed close enough to disturb her hair. Kellan increased the pressure. Brynn entered a clinch before he could complete the next combination, but the difference in strength was immediate. Kellan separated her arms, turned his hips, and threw her aside. She recovered before falling and moved toward the cage. Kellan followed. The body strike landed beneath her ribs. Brynn dropped to one knee. For several seconds, she could not draw air. Her mouth opened, but her lungs refused to respond. The crowd blurred beyond the fence. Kellan stepped back with a satisfied expression. He had felt how little resistance her body offered. Harlan reached for the towel in her corner. The referee counted. Brynn forced one foot beneath her, then the other. Air returned as a thin, painful breath. She stood before the count ended. Kellan no longer looked amused. He looked interested. Now he knew she could be hurt. He began hunting for the finish. Brynn refused to exchange strikes. She controlled distance whenever possible and entered the clinch when he moved too close. Kellan drove her backward, but she turned against the cage and made him support her weight while she protected her ribs. The referee separated them. She repeated the process. Every reset consumed time. Every clinch denied Kellan the clean knockout he wanted. He landed enough to win the round easily, but not enough to end it. When the bell sounded, Brynn returned to her corner with one arm held close to her side. Harlan examined the swelling beneath her ribs. "The rib is damaged," she said. He asked if she could continue. Brynn looked beyond him toward Micah and the computer beside the production area. "I only need him angry one time." Across the cage, Kellan's trainer told him to remain patient. He had won every exchange. There was no reason to chase a finish. Keep distance, work the body, and let the referee stop it. Kroll leaned close from behind the corner. Humiliate her. The second round began. Kellan moved toward Brynn with exaggerated calm. He gestured toward the audience, then attempted a theatrical combination designed to end with the right hand he trusted most. Brynn saw the weight shift onto his lead foot. She stepped outside the punch, hooked his ankle, and pulled as his upper body continued forward. Kellan hit the floor. He stood almost immediately. The takedown had not hurt him. Then he heard the crowd laughing. His trainer shouted for him to reset. Kroll told him to make her pay. Kellan charged. The careful distance disappeared. His first punch missed because he threw it before his feet were set. Brynn moved behind him and attached herself to his back. As he turned, she trapped one arm and climbed higher. For a few seconds, her forearm moved beneath his chin. Kellan's expression changed from anger to alarm. Brynn tightened the position. He escaped through force. He pulled her weight forward, tore the trapped arm free, and drove backward until her body struck the cage. She held on. Kellan turned and slammed her against it again. Her grip loosened. He caught her around the waist and threw her sideways. Brynn landed awkwardly near the fence and did not move. The referee rushed toward her. Kellan turned away before the match had been stopped. He climbed onto the lower edge of the cage and raised both arms toward the cameras. Behind him, Brynn's fingers moved. She pressed one palm against the floor, brought a knee beneath her, and slowly stood. The bikers did not cheer. Their silence spread through the workshop until Kellan noticed the celebration around him had faded. He turned. Brynn was standing behind him, one arm guarding her ribs, her face pale but steady. For the first time that night, uncertainty entered his eyes. The referee directed both fighters to their corners as the round ended. Kellan walked away breathing harder than he should have been. His hands hung near his waist. Brynn watched his fingers tremble. When he lifted his head, his pupils were enlarged beneath the lights. His chest rose in short, uneven movements, and a violent pulse hammered through the side of his neck. The noise of the workshop seemed to fall away. Brynn had seen those signs before. Brynn stepped away from her corner before the bell could sound. She told the referee Kellan might be suffering a medical emergency. His hands were trembling, his pupils were enlarged, and his breathing did not match the pace of the fight. The pulse in his neck was pounding too hard and too fast. Kellan heard her and laughed without humor. "You know you can't win," he said. "So now you want the doctor to stop it." Brynn did not answer the insult. She described the symptoms again, more slowly this time. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. Kellan turned toward Dr. Lennox Fain. The doctor stood outside the cage with the black case beside his feet. He looked down instead of meeting Kellan's eyes. That was enough. Kellan understood that Brynn was not inventing the danger. He also understood that the people who had promised to protect his career knew something they had never told him. Kroll moved closer to the corner. "If you stop now, the documentary is finished," he said. The sponsors walk. The title opportunities disappear. Everything we built is gone. Kellan stared at him. Kroll continued. You leave that cage, and you leave millions of dollars behind. The crowd had become muffled beneath the blood beating in Kellan's ears. He looked toward his trainer, but the man's eyes moved toward Kroll before returning to him. Kellan finally saw the shape of the trap. Kroll did not care whether he won safely. He cared about the footage, the humiliation, the property. If the champion collapsed after producing the spectacle, Kroll would call it an unforeseeable tragedy and keep selling the story. Kellan was still responsible for striking Rafe. He was responsible for humiliating Micah and for every cruel decision that had brought him there. But now he was also standing inside the machine Kroll had built. Brynn watched the realization reach him. Her objective changed. She had entered the cage to protect Iron Ridge. Now she was looking at another man being pushed toward the same kind of death that had taken Elias. For the first time since entering Iron Ridge, Kellan did not look like a champion performing. He looked like a frightened man trapped between truth his body was telling him and the identity he had sold to everyone watching. Brynn recognized that fear because Elias had worn the same expression when people insisted he could continue. The difference was that nobody had stepped between Elias and those profiting from his pride. Brynn could not change what happened 20 years earlier, but she could refuse to let machinery claim another life again. Whether Kellan deserved her concern no longer mattered. Mercy was not permission, forgiveness, or surrender. It was the decision to stop becoming like the person who caused the harm. If you believe no contract, sponsor, or career is worth sacrificing someone's life, hit like and subscribe. Men like Kroll depend on everyone else staying silent. The referee asked Kellan whether he wanted the doctor to examine him. Kroll answered before he could. He's fine. Kellan looked at Brynn, then at the cameras surrounding the cage. Pride made the decision. He raised his gloves. The final bell sounded. Kellan attacked immediately. There was no patience left in him. He threw combinations meant to finish the fight in seconds, but Brynn gave ground and forced him to cross the cage after her. Every missed strike demanded another explosive step. Every turn made his breathing rougher. Brynn refused to stand still. Kellan drove her toward the fence. She escaped before he could trap her. He swung again, missed, and stumbled half a step before recovering. Kroll screamed for him to end it. Kellan gathered himself and attempted a spinning strike designed for the cameras. Brynn recognized the shift of his supporting leg. She stepped inside the rotation, trapped the leg before his body could complete the turn, and drove him downward. Kellan struck the floor hard. Brynn moved behind him. He tried to rise, but she threaded one arm beneath his chin and locked the other behind his head. Kellan planted one foot and attempted to explode upward. Brynn tightened the choke. Kroll shouted for him to keep fighting. Kellan reached for her wrist. His fingers slipped. He tried again, but the strength in his arms had begun to disappear. Then his hand touched Brynn's forearm. Once, twice, a brief tapping motion. The referee was positioned on the wrong side and did not see it. The crowd mistook it for another attempt to break her grip. The cameras captured everything. Brynn felt the change before anyone else. Kellan's pulse fluttered violently against her arm. It lost rhythm, returned, then stumbled again. His body was no longer resisting with the coordination of a conscious fighter. His heart was failing beneath the pressure. Brynn had the victory. If she held the choke, the referee would eventually recognize the submission or stop the match. Iron Ridge would keep the property. Kroll's agreement would become enforceable. If she released him, Kellan might recover and attack again. Kroll continued screaming. Brynn saw Elias on the warehouse floor 20 years earlier. She remembered adults watching, waiting, calculating what the crowd had paid to see. She loosened her arm. Kellan rolled away and looked at her in confusion. He pushed one hand against the mat and tried to stand. His body stopped responding. He collapsed face first. For 1 second, the entire workshop froze. Kroll pointed toward him. He's pretending. Keep filming. Brynn rolled Kellan onto his back and pressed 2 fingers against his neck. There was no pulse. She began giving orders. Bring the defibrillator. Clear the cage. Call the paramedics. Get Kroll's people away from the door. The bikers moved without hesitation. Brynn began chest compressions. Each downward movement drove pain through her damaged ribs, but she did not slow. Harlan cleared the cage while another member carried in the emergency unit kept in the rehabilitation room. Kroll demanded that the cameras remain focused on Kellan. Brynn attached the pads, and ordered everyone back. The first shock lifted Kellan's body from the mat. Nothing returned. Brynn resumed compressions. Outside the cage, Kroll leaned toward two security men and spoke beneath the noise. He ordered them into the workshop office. They were to destroy the server, place illegal weapons inside the storage room, and leave evidence suggesting Iron Ridge had planned the violence from the beginning. Micah saw the move. He still held Elias's repaired glove. He placed it beside the computer and followed. Inside the cage, Brynn prepared the second shock. The defibrillator screen flickered. Then the power failed. At the workshop office, one of the security men opened the server cabinet while the other removed wrapped handguns from a bag. Micah crouched behind a parts shelf and reached toward the backup control. The second man turned. Their eyes met. He moved toward Micah. At that moment, emergency power returned to the cage. Brynn delivered the second shock. Kellan's body jerked. The monitor produced one uneven line, then another. A weak, unstable rhythm appeared. Paramedics entered through the main doors. Kellan's eyelids opened briefly. The first face he saw was Brynn's. The woman he had mocked, threatened, and tried to humiliate was pressing one hand against his shoulder and telling him to keep breathing. In the office, the security man grabbed Micah by the shirt. Before he could drag him away, the workshop doors locked. Harlan's voice carried through the building. Nobody touches them. The two men had expected the Hells Angels to attack. That was the evidence Kroll needed. Instead, members surrounded the office with open hands and calm voices. Every security camera remained active. Harlan instructed the men to place the weapons, storage devices, and bag on the floor. One refused. Nobody struck him. The circles simply tightened until escape became impossible. Micah pulled free and reached the computer. He connected the partial files to the event system. The large screens above the workshop changed. The audience saw Dr. Fain preparing the syringe and heard Kroll ask whether the dose would increase aggression. They saw records of fighters suffering tremors, confusion, abnormal heart rhythms, and sudden collapse. Bank transfers appeared next, linking Kroll's company to county officials. Then came written instructions directing the documentary crew to provoke Iron Ridge members until someone attacked. Altered debt records followed. The final file carried Elias Mercer's name. The footage was damaged, but enough remained. A younger Dr. Fain stood beside Elias before the illegal exhibition. Kroll told him the crowd had paid too much for the match to be canceled. When someone warned that Elias's heart rate was unstable, Kroll ordered the event to continue. The workshop fell silent. Brynn looked toward the screen while paramedics lifted Kellan onto a stretcher. For 20 years, she had believed the truth died with her brother. Now the entire room had heard it. Kroll moved toward an exit. State investigators entered before he reached it. Harlan had sent Micah's partial evidence to them before the fight. They had monitored the event, waiting for Kroll to attempt evidence destruction or plant material inside the workshop. The bikers had defeated him without giving him the violence he needed. As investigators led Kroll away, he looked toward Kellan being loaded into the ambulance. Kellan was conscious enough to see him. For the first time, he understood that Brynn had been fighting the man outside the cage as much as the man inside it. Kellan survived. From his hospital bed, he learned that Brynn had released the choke because she recognized the medical danger. Doctors told him that a few more seconds under pressure might have killed him. Then he watched the footage. His hand tapped Brynn's arm twice before she let go. The referee had missed it. The cameras had not. Kellan publicly acknowledged that Brynn defeated him. He admitted Kroll manipulated him, but refused to use manipulation as an excuse. He accepted responsibility for striking Micah, injuring Rafe, threatening Brynn, and allowing fame to replace judgment. His testimony strengthened the criminal case. The fraudulent debt was canceled. Iron Ridge's property transferred permanently into a community trust. Kellan lost sponsors and received a professional suspension. As part of a civil settlement, he funded a new medical and rehabilitation room at the workshop. Several months later, he returned without cameras. He apologized to Rafe. Then he stood in front of Micah and admitted that no championship gave him the right to put his hands on someone smaller and younger. Micah did not forgive him immediately. Kellan accepted that too. Brynn refused interviews, sponsorships, and every offer to fight professionally. At the workshop reopening, a reporter asked Harlan why dozens of large, experienced bikers had chosen a 120-pound woman as their best fighter. Harlan looked toward the corner. Brynn sat beneath the old photograph with Elias's repaired glove resting in her hands. "Because the best fighter isn't the person who can hurt you the most," he said. "It's the person who knows when not to." Later, Kellan approached Brynn privately. "Why did you save me after everything I did?" Brynn looked down at the repaired strap. "Beating you was never the difficult part. Giving you the chance to become better was." The room around her was still filled with men much larger than she was. At the beginning, everyone outside Iron Ridge had overlooked her. Now nobody did. Comment, "Strength is mercy," if you believe Brynn made the harder choice. And share this story with someone who understands that real strength is not measured by how much damage a person can cause, but by what they choose to protect.